today we are going to be looking at the end of year and beginning of new school year processes. So our borrower update essentials. So if I go to my agenda for today, we'll be looking at firstly information related to the manual updating of borrowers. So if you need to add your new borrowers manually, there is some updating that you would need to do. So increment scholastic years and probably add new roll classes. So you can increment the roll classes and add new borrowers manually. And also we'll look at briefly the deleting of unused roll classes once you've set your new information for your new and existing borrowers. So those processes are done for manually adding new borrowers or when you just import new borrowers. Looking at borrower imports next from your student management information system. So not specifically talking about automatic borrower loading here. However, some of these items that we'll be looking at still do apply in that case. We'll be looking at importing just new borrowers and also importing new and existing borrowers. So one thing I'll add here to start off with, if you're importing a file of all your borrowers and that file contains the new scholastic years and roll classes for the existing borrowers, you don't need to run the manual update options at the top. Then we have other New Year processes, so deleting borrowers in bulk, those who have left, but terminating loans for these borrowers who have current loans. You need to do that before you can delete their records. Then adding holiday dates using the close dates option in branches. So items are not due back when the library is closed. And updating borrower loan categories using Exchange. So as your borrowers go up in years at the school, they might have different lending rules to apply to them. So we need to change their borrower loan category. And then finally, just a few things about reviewing the lending rules. So you may have circulation expiry dates and fixed due dates that you need to set. Okay, so one final thing before we go on about backing up data. So when you go to work through these processes, it's probably a good idea to ask your IT support to make a special backup for you if your Oliver is locally installed. For hosted clients, if you need to run these processes, I suggest that you do them first thing in the morning, because if you find that you've made a mistake and you need to restore from a backup, we need to know about that pretty much immediately, because we do backups nightly. We'll be able to grab last night's backup. But if you've done any work and before you've done these roll-up procedures, then you might lose some data. So I suggest you do them first thing in the morning. Okay, so moving to the first option here, incrementing scholastic years and roll classes and also adding new roll classes. So with this option, you only need to run these if you are updating new borrowers into your system. So if you're doing some sort of import that contains both new and existing borrowers, you really don't need to run these processes. As if you are updating only new borrowers, you need to be careful with setting this up. So we want to roll up the years and the roll classes, so we're freeing up first year for our new borrowers here. So updating scholastic years. This illustration, I'll go through this in a bit more detail on my Oliver system. The crucial part of this, apart from telling Oliver which year a year rolls up to, is setting the process order. So this must be correct, otherwise you will have everyone merged into the one scholastic year. So this process, it works like a countdown, and I'll explain what I mean when I go into Oliver specifically. But this is the type of value that you should end up with when you've set this up to increment. So I've got classes or years 7 to 13, and I've also added in a leavers group. So when I roll everybody up, my final year students end up in leavers, and this group, I can use this to identify the borrowers that I need to delete. So you could do this now. If you wanted to, you can move everybody up and delete the leavers. Now, incrementing the roll classes is very similar. However, it's not always so neat as scholastic years, because your classes may split up, or they may not be as tidy as my examples here, 7A going to 8A. It could be 7A going to 8G, or 7A splitting into several classes. And if that is the case, this is where we would probably recommend that you consider importing borrower records. But when I look at importing, I'll go over the things that you need to be aware of in that case. But if you manually add in your new borrowers, you'll probably also need to add in a new roll class. So that's fairly straightforward to do. So I'm going to move to my Oliver system, and I'm going to go to circulation, and I'm going to go to scholastic years. And this is the information in Oliver, as you saw on the slide. Now, you may have all your years here, but you may not have a leavers group. So you can add in a new leavers scholastic year here. And what this is going to do is going to allow me to move my year 13s into those leavers so I can delete them. Now, with the setting up, I said that this incrementing works like a countdown. The higher the year, the higher the process order, and it goes 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that seems to be opposite to what most people would expect. So this is why you need to be careful. So if we're starting with just the years here, we would edit each year. So if I go into edit my first year here, so scholastic year 7, that's my lowest year at school. So I would say that that rolls over to year 8. And the process order is 1. And then we turn the process on. And then we have default borrower loan category. Now you can enter this in, and it works when you import new borrowers into Oliver. It doesn't work when you're updating existing borrowers or when you're adding borrowers in manually. It's only when you're importing new borrowers. So I've set that, I'll save it, and then you work your way through each year. So you might find yours are not as tidy as mine. They could be mixed up. So go from the lowest year to the next one. So that would be process order 2. So 9 to 10 will be 3. 10 to 11 here will be 4. And you'll notice that I have a different borrower loan category. And this is part of my lending rules. So I have different rules that apply to my year 10s. And then 11 to 12 is 5. 12 to 13 is 6. And 13 to leavers is 7. And leavers does not have a process order. So when we run through the increments, I go to that, and it asks you, are you sure you want to proceed? So I'm going to roll everybody up. So I'm going to say yes to this. And then you'll see here what I mean by the countdown. So it started at the highest year. So 13 has gone to leavers, and 12 to 13, and so on, until finally it's 7 to 8. And then that's complete. And we just go back to the list. Now, if it worked the other way round, everyone would end up in leavers. So I'll go back to my list. And if there are several of you working in the library, if you go to increment years again, it does show you when it was run last. So take note of that, just in case someone has already run this. So you can cancel out of that. Now what I'll end up with here, if I go to year 7, there's no one there now. They're empty. But if I go to leavers, my previous year 13s are now in the leavers year. And I could go to usage here, click on the borrowers there, and now that I've moved them up, I could delete the records. I'm going to look at that later. And then if I go into a record, you can see there's the year for the leavers. Okay, so what I'm doing here is if you have to roll everybody up because you don't have something like automatic borrower loading. Now, automatic borrower loading may apply to people who are locally hosted or those who are hosted by us. At automatic borrower loading, if you do have that, all this incrementing of years and role classes will happen automatically. The thing that will not happen automatically is these leavers will not be removed. You need to remove those. So that occurs whether you use automatic borrower loading or not. Okay, so you can see the change here. It's changed the year leavers, but it hasn't changed the role class. So I may be able to go to role classes and run the same process, and you see that I have it set up, the end result here. So I've added in a leavers group, and I've said that I want to roll up 13A and 13B to leavers. And rolling up 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. For each year 7 class, I've got process order 1. So they do not need to have a separate process order. 1 2, 3 is fine. If again they're all mixed up, go to search, put in, for instance, 7 star and search that, and then it brings up all the year 7 classes there, and then I can edit and change the details like I did in Scholastic Year. So the roll class rolls up, process order for 7 to 8 is 1. We turn the process order on. And then one thing to note here, if you want to send out overdue notices to the class teacher, you can put the email address into the roll class. Okay, so I'm just going to cancel out of that. So the same process can apply. So if I increment the classes here, now as I said before, this really only works if it's nice and neat, like my examples here. If the classes are all over the place, it's pretty difficult to perform this type of rollover. So you'll probably find that you're updating the classes manually, or you import information for the existing borrowers. Okay, so again, my year 7 classes, they're going to be empty because we've moved everybody up. And the leavers group there, that's going to have both my classes that were in previously in year 13. So you can see they've all changed there. And then again, for manual updating, you may need to add in a new roll class. So it's pretty straightforward here. Oops, put that in. And then when you're adding them in initially, you might not update any of this detail. Just put in the roll class name and save it. So it's ready for you when you update your borrowers manually. And one last thing here, when you've probably finished everything in your updates, you might want to come back here and delete unused roll classes. And you can see here that I've got 5 classes that aren't used at the moment. So I could delete them, but I would really wait until you've updated all your borrower records before you do this. And you might find, again, particularly those people who have automatic borrower loading and a lot of different classes over the years, that you might want to go in and clear out these unused roll classes. And unfortunately, there is no equivalent process in the Scholastic Year if you've got years that are not being used any longer. So that will be a manual update. So I'm going to cancel out of that for the moment. Okay, so that rolling up of years and classes, that will ready me for entering in new borrowers into the borrowers area. So all my new year 7s and any other new borrowers within the school. Okay, so the next thing that I want to move on to now is borrower importing. If you are importing just new borrowers, then you would still need to go through this incrementing of the years and possibly the roll classes. If you are importing records for both new and existing borrowers, you shouldn't need to go through the increment process. So we're going to look now at the fields that you might want to import. Now, not all of these fields are absolutely necessary. Particularly draw your attention to the more personal data like birthday, email, address information. An alternate mail title, which I use for the parent's name. So we can address overdue notices to the parents by putting their name into this field. Now, you may not want to import this information because of the new GDPR rules. So that's fine. You don't need to if you don't want to. So the core information that you might want to enter in is the family name or surname, the personal name, given name, the year, so that's the scholastic year, the roll class, form group, tutor group, however you address it, and the gender. So gender, it's M for male and F for female. Now, I've also got here student code. Now, student code is, let's say, a record number for the student in your school management system. I'll use the example here of sims.net. The student code, or what we would have as our student code in Oliver, is usually the admission number, or it can be the UPN. And what this is used for is a reference point, so we can update existing Oliver borrowers with information from the admin system. So a file would contain this admissions number or UPN if we're going to update existing borrowers. If you're just going to import new borrowers, then that is not absolutely necessary, but it is if you're going to update existing borrowers. Because if your file does not have this, but your Oliver record does, or vice versa, you'll find that you end up with duplicate borrowers. So care needs to be taken with that. So I'm going to go into my Oliver system again, and where we do the import is management and import. And we import a CSV file, so comma separated variable file. And it may look something like this. So this is a file that I'm going to import. So it's fairly generic in comparison to what you would have. But we've got information in here, so essentially columns separated by a comma here. So name information, year and class details, the admission number, gender, date of birth, and I've also got some email and address columns here. And parent name, which I'm going to put into the alternate mail title field. So I have a file that contains information about existing as well as new borrowers. So this student code, or admission number as it is, that's the important piece of information that's required in this file to update my student borrowers. But that is in the student code field in my records there. Yep, so if we're updating existing borrowers, probably the main thing that you're going to be updating is the year and the class. But you could be updating address information as well, or email. But anything that's changed, if it can match on the borrower using the student code and mission number, it will update that borrower. What we need to do is we need to create this CSV template. Now, I will add that one of the documents on the handouts goes through this process in some detail. So if you look at that, hopefully you shouldn't go wrong. But of course, if you've got any queries, the support team can help you with that. So I've chosen CSV, and I've already been looking at borrower imports, so it's brought up quite a bit of information about a borrower import. So you can have a look at this as well as, and also you've got the help documents in Oliver that you can look at too. So I need to create a CSV template. So to match those fields in the file that I'm going to import. So of course, I've started my file already here. So I would have gone to new, and then the file name I choose is client.xml. Then give it a name and click add. Once you've added it in, you will have a blank used fields column. And all the fields that you can add to this are on the right. So I've got a partial file here. So, okay, so what I need to add in, I've got email. So I've got address fields, postcode, and the parent's name. So I need to add in those extra fields. So when you create your template, it needs to match the column order and number. And you'll find that when you go to import, if there is a problem, you'll soon see that that's the case. So my address information here. So I just click on it and take it across. So I'm using all these address fields. And then I had, if I go back to that, I've got postcode. So you can click on that and just type in the letter to take you to the right field eventually. There it is. So there's postcode. And then I'll go back up to the top where I had alternate or alt mail title, where I've got the parent's name in there. Because I want to email or send out overdue notices addressed to the parent. So I've moved over all the fields that I've got in my file. So as I say, surname is family name, personal name is given name, then we've got the year and the roll class that we want to update, and then this student code. And then the gender, again, I'll just go back to this, so it's M or F in uppercase, and then my email information. So the same fields in the same order there, hopefully. And then when you put in any dates, you need to tell it what format the dates are in. So mine is this sort of standard. So you could just start typing it in and it will give you suggestions. But I've put in the /. It's uppercase M for the month, and then another /, and then just the first couple of Y's there, and eventually that'll just disappear when it's correct, and we save that. So any dates, you do need to tell the format there. Okay, so that template is now ready to run with my file. So I'll just close that up. Now, just to go back to the borrowers, I'm going to have a look at the year, the levers that I've got. Okay, so they're the year 13s, they're the levers there. Now, this is the student code. Now, I will say that the SIMS admission number is usually 6 characters rather than 5. So slightly different to my example here, but that's the student code. So updating borrowers. So let's say I'll go to the current year 13s, the ones that I've rolled up. I'm going to update these, and what I'm going to do is it's going to update the roll class. I've created a new class called Final Year. So it will update these year 13s, but it uses that student code as its reference point. So if that was not there, but it was in my import file, we'd end up with duplicates. So there's the information there that I'm going to load, just so you can see that it works. Okay, so I'm just going to close that up once more. So I'll go back to management and import to CSV. And now with the details here, recurrence, you leave that at run once. You then browse for your file. So I'm going to browse for the file. Leave the file encoding. The CSV template. Choose your template that you've created. And then click default tags. So this will tag new and modified borrowers. So you can view them easily if you need to. And then you have a preview that you can show. Now, you should always do this, and it will remind you anyway, because if I click on this and if I had made a mistake, it would show me pretty well much straight away. So it would tell you if the number of rows and columns that didn't match correctly. But luckily for me, I've got this set up correctly. So you can have a look at the first few borrowers and you can see fairly well that the information is correct there. Now I have a header line here, so I need to exclude that from the import. If there is a problem, then you'll need to cancel out and have a look at the file or look at the template. So a lot of the time you might have too many columns in your file in comparison to your template. That's usually the problem that will be highlighted here. But this is a really good indicator as to whether or not it's going to work for you. So you get a result like this, it usually is going to work fine. So I'll skip the first row. Then it asks us what we want to do with new records. So with new year 7s that I have in my full file, I'm just going to say add those records, and they're going to be tagged with this tag. If we were importing everyone from scratch, or we were a brand new system and we needed to add in our borrowers, you can assume all new. But usually if you're updating existing and adding new, you leave that at add. And then with existing borrowers, you set this to replace existing. So we're replacing any fields that have changed So they're different in the CSV file that you're importing. So things like the year and the class, the tutor group, the address, the email address, information like that, that will replace anything that has changed. Enhance means filling in blank fields. So that's not what we're doing here. We're replacing information for the new school year. Then they're tagged with a modified tagged here. You can be notified if you're going to let this run overnight. It's not absolutely necessary, and it chooses an email in the parameters. And then we come to allocating barcode numbers. Now I'm just going to go to my presentation again, because I haven't mentioned this yet about allocating the alias or the barcodes. Now in the file that I have attached as a handout, I talk about using, let's say, the admissions number as the alias or the barcode for the borrower. And how you can do that is by adding a new column and copying in the admissions number into that new column and using that as your alias or your barcode. So I've referred to it as the student code, but I suppose I really mean the admission number if we're using SIMS as our example here. So I suggest this because it's a unique number for the student. So rather than having to create a new sequence of numbers, you can just use the admissions number. But you do need to be careful if you do this, because you'll need to open up the file in Excel to create a new column. And with SIMS, the admission number, leading zeros, Excel will strip it off. So you need to format the columns to add in those zeros once more. So the handout on Borrow Import explains how you do that. So you do need to be careful if the admissions number that you copy has leading zeros. And also, if you save that file and the student code field, the admissions number field, you strip off the zeros, that as well, that could cause problems sometimes. So you do need to be careful about leading zeros in the file if you open it in Excel. Now, you can allocate a number during the import, and that's based on management parameter 3352, and that's client initial barcode number. Now, that's what I'm using for my borrowers. Now, this will not work if you're using the SoftLink style B barcode labels that have a check digit and a school code on the end, because this incrementing of numbers only works on the end number. So when you've got uniform information and check digits, it doesn't work. So you need to update these in another way. So I'm going to go back to my Oliver system. So this is the next number in my sequence, and it remembered this from the last time I imported borrowers. So it'll automatically update that parameter, or you can put in your first number there before you start importing if you wish. Okay. If you do have the alias or the barcode in the file, so you've copied the the admission number to use that as the ALS barcode, you can leave this blank. Now then, with this next option, ignore leading zeros. This is referring to the student code and the admission number. So if the zeros has been stripped off the number in the file, I think you can ignore it if it's got the zeros in the Oliver record. But you need to be careful with this. I really favour the belt and braces approach. I prefer to have them matching. So again, I'll show you what I mean here with the file. So I have in my Oliver system this number, and I make sure that I have the leading zeros in my import file. So I have these exactly the same. If you're unsure about that, then it's probably best to talk to one of the support team here. They'll be able to explain it fully for you. Okay, so then we've got some default information in here. So default borrower type is student. Default branch, if you've got more than one branch, I'm choosing my junior library because that's where my year 7s go. Default user role, leave that at OPAC only. So that's the lowest level of access that a logging in borrower can have. And then default borrower loan category, I'm going to assume that most of my borrowers will be years 7 to 9. But if I've got this default category in the scholastic year, then new borrowers will get the appropriate borrower loan category. So the thing to take note here is new borrowers. So if you have a combination of students and staff in your file, which some of you may do, and with, pardon me, automatic borrower loading, it usually is, pardon me, a combination of the two. So when it's set up, they say default borrower loan category is staff, but we make sure that each year has the appropriate student borrower loan category. So I'll set that to staff just so you see how that works. And then we have removal marking. Now this is another interesting part of the import process. I had set against my scholastic year, I rolled up the year 13s to leavers. So that's how I was identifying my people who had left in the manual process. However, if you're importing a full file and you want to identify them via the import, we mark borrowers for removal. Now that is that the file that I have does not contain some of the borrowers that are in Oliver. So when we can't match import file, well, there's no match between these two, we can tag those borrowers for removal. But it is a search strategy that you need to enter in. So back to my details here, actually back to my presentation. So the search strategy is something like this. Type equals student. So we're mainly concerned with student borrowers here. But there are other borrowers that we want to make sure are not tagged for deletion. So hence we have and alias equals administrator. So that's my login. And I have an alias for librarian, not equal to librarian, so I don't want them tagged for deletion. We have an OPAC borrower, so that's what you see before you log in. We don't want that tagged for deletion. And we also have a regular process borrower. That controls things that occur overnight in your housekeeping. Again, ABL is part of that if you've got it. The accelerated reader updates also processed as a regular process, so we don't want to delete that. So it's the alias not equal to, and then these values. So with this strategy, we're tagging students that are not in the file being imported, but we don't want to tag our administrator login, our librarian login, or our anonymous OPAC login or borrower. So what I need to do, if I go back out to my Oliver system, and I already have that strategy in the text file here. So I'm just going to copy this. One of the hints that support gave me with this is that you may have certain borrowers that you don't want to be tagged for deletion. You can give them a different borrower type. So make them external rather than students or staff. So they wouldn't be part of the import process. But with this, when it's imported, the borrowers that are not matched with a record being imported, they'll be tagged. So we might have to be deleted, or again, if you have ABL, it might be not in MIS or not in SIMS or to be removed. It could be several different types of labels, but I'm going to put in not in MIS. And then I'll have one last check just to see that I've got everything correct. And then I will click import. So that's now submitted. And usually what I do is I want it to run immediately. So we go to System and then to Housekeeping. And then we edit Housekeeping. And we scroll right down to the bottom. We go to Run Now. And then we choose Background Import Regular Process. So choose that and then save it. And now that's running in the background. Okay, so it shouldn't take too long. The process in my system will be a lot faster because I'm not updating that many borrowers. But that's gone through and it's worked correctly. Sometimes you might see a cross here, but that doesn't mean that it hasn't worked. There might be a few minor problems. The numbers here can be a little bit deceptive, so we'll look at the result. And it says here that I have 14 new records and 68 updated records and one record that was not changed. So I can click on the tag search here for new records to see my new borrowers. So these are my new year 7s, and I'll point out here that The loan category is years 7 to 9. Now I set that as being staff when I set up the import, but it saw in Scholastic Year and Year 7 that was my default category. So that is the category that it loaded for those new borrowers. And again, just to show you that this worked with our other borrowers, so these Year 13s that I had, so now my new Year 13s, I set their tutor group from 13A, B, whatever, to final year. So if I go into this, and I can see the usage there, go into it, and now we can see the final year for that. Okay. Right, so that's worked. And then if I go to the tag manager, there I have the records that have imported, those that have updated, and those not in MIS. So I go into this, and you can see that they're the levers that I had, but now they've got this tag here, so not in MIS. So for those of you who have automatic borrower loading, this is how you identify the borrowers that you now need to remove. So that is the next step in the process. So that's our import done. Again, if you look at the document that I have attached in the handouts, that goes into more detail about the imports, but I hope that's given you a better idea of how that can work. So now we've updated the borrowers for the most part, so we've got some further tidying up to do. So the next stage is the bulk borrower deletion. So those levers. And one thing with this is that this process will only delete borrowers who have no current loans or charges against them. So if you do have loans or charges, there's a little bit of tidying up more that you need to do. Okay, so I'll just go back to my Oliver system. So these borrowers, if I'd done the roll up and then wanted to delete them, I could have just gone straight to levers to bring them up in my search here. ABL or tagging, when I've imported all my borrowers, use the tag manager to identify them. There, so I'm getting the same value in my records here. So I've got that list there. I can now go to my right-hand menu and I can delete records. So it tells you quite specifically here that borrowers with current loans, they're not going to be removed. So these people, they're going to remain when I confirm this. It'll only show you the first 20 borrowers in a longer list here. But if we now confirm this, it goes through the process and then it shows you the ones that it has been able to remove and those that are left. And we just go back by clicking proceed. So it just takes us back into the record here. Now, the problem we've got is we may want to get rid of those other borrowers, but we've got to return the loans first. So how do we do that? And what we do is we go into the circulation desk and we use terminate loans. So if I've got my list there, just going to move that down so we can see it better. So I can search for my borrower. Now I'm getting some other messages here, and these are some of the tidying up tasks that you may need to perform. But I'm just going to get rid of that. So it's telling me that they had an expiry date. So now what I need to do is I need to terminate loans. Actually, I might move that back up. So terminate loans. In this situation, let's say the borrowers have gone, you're not going to get your books back. The easiest thing to do here is to weed. So with weeding, it will return the items, and then it's jumped me to my management screen again, where I can confirm that I wish to weed this record. So I click confirm, and then it will ask me if I want to delete the resources without copies. So I always go to this next stage. So delete that. And then that was the final copy of this item. So we confirm. And that's done. So what I usually do here is I just clear that borrower and then I go on to the next borrower. So I just work through them there. Now, the other messages that we're getting here is about a borrower's membership expiry date or a circulation expiry date, and finally overdue loans. So again, I use the terminate loans and just weed. And I use this if I'm pretty certain that the book is not going to come back. They've long gone. I have very little hope of retrieving that item. So just confirm and delete the resources without copies and confirm once more. Okay, then if I go back to the borrower, and I'm just going to finish with that, I'm going to bring up my next borrower on that list. Okay, so if I'm just saying yes to that. Now, if you think, oh, I might get a book back, so clicking terminate loans here on the bottom right, I can say, right, I want to change the status of these loans to missing. And then you see the borrower's name coming up in the status reason, and then you can just click return. So it's not weeding, it's just returning the item, and hopefully at some point, maybe the younger brother or sister of this borrower will bring the book back, and in circulation desk it will tell you the item was previously missing, it's now been changed to available. So if I click on the barcode here, and it's refreshing that, it's taking me into the copy record. You can see the change of status, the reason, and today's date as the missing or disposed date there. Okay, so I would work through each of these borrowers. I wouldn't go and delete them individually. I would work through my list and then I'd probably go back to circulation, borrowers, use my tag, not in MIS, do that, and then go through the delete process once more. So I've just got one borrower left who needs to be cleared off there. Okay, so that's bulk deletion of your borrowers. So apologies, I'm going a little bit over time, but we're nearly there. And then we've got terminate loans for the current loans. So that is in the handout. So the next thing we've got here is related to the lending rules. Now this is not going to apply to everybody, but in my examples here, my borrowers have more lending rights as they go up in years. Now I mentioned before that default borrower loan categories only apply to new borrowers being loaded in. It does not apply to borrowers who are moved up. So I must use the exchange process to change my new year 10s to their correct borrower loan category. So what we do here is once they've all been rolled up, been changed, I can search for year 10 here. So in my new year 10s, so you can see their loan category is not correct. So I now go to exchange, click on that. It shows me the first 4 of my 10 borrowers. I can see the borrower loan category there, but I want to go to the borrower loan category in the bottom half of the screen here. So I choose years 10 and 11 from the list, and then I click start and run that. And then it's usually fairly fast. So now you can see the result with the first 4 borrowers. They've changed, and I can view all affected borrowers if I want to double check. And now they've changed to 10 and 11. And for my 6th form, so my new year 12s, I need to do the same thing. So go to search in borrowers, go to 12, search that. So these are my new year 12s. They've still got 10 and 11 loan category there. Go to exchange, choose that borrower loan category, 6th form, click start, and then the process has gone through. So that's my new borrower loan category for year 12s. And I can check that that's worked correctly there. So that is as a result of my lending rules. So I'm going to look at that in the final part. But just one more thing I'm going to look at is holiday dates. So we want to put in holiday dates into the branches. So we don't want items being due back from loan when the library is closed. So we must put in our holiday dates here. So I would usually put these in as soon as I know what the dates are. So you must put these in with enough time to take effect, because it doesn't change due dates for previous loans. It only works for new loans. So for every branch that you use for circulation, you need to go into it and you need to add your holiday dates in close dates. So I'm just going to edit. And you can see I've got my previous dates here, so you can remove them if you wish. But I'll type in the dates that I've got. So I'm going to put in the October half-term dates. So it's just a standard day, month, year format. And then you put a dash. And then you put in the last day of the holiday. So it's inclusive, first day to last day of your holidays. So you type that in and then you click add. And then you go back and you put in your next date. So here's my Christmas holidays. So the date, a dash, and the last day of the holidays. You usually don't have to worry about the weekends because the system recognizes them as being closed. So put in that, click add, and it adds it to the bottom of the list. So continue to add in the dates. A single date is a single date. Once done, click save. And they'll be displayed in the correct order. So if you do need to insert dates further up, that's fine. When you enter it in initially, it will go down to the bottom of the screen. However, it will be in the correct position when you save the records there. So it's pretty straightforward to enter in, but not always easy to remember. So just one hint here, I add in branches to my menu here. So go to my menu, organize, edit, and go down to system. So right down to the bottom here, and you will have an option for branches. So just click on that, use the arrow to take it across to the left-hand side, and then save it. Now I've already got it there, and you might have noticed at the very beginning in my overview, it's also appearing here as a starred option. So it'll be a reminder, oh yes, I need to put in my holiday dates, and that goes into the branches. So the last thing that I want to look at here, and I've also got that in my menu to appear in overview, is the lending rules. So items that might need updating. Now again, this is not going to affect everybody, but one of the things that we saw was for those levers, it spoke about circulation expiry date had expired, and that's what it was referring to. I set this expiry date to stop loans being processed past the 1st of June for my sixth formers. So coming back to school in September, I need to change this. So once it's no longer necessary for the previous year, go in and change it for your new school year. So you can see that it's got that pink background there because it has already passed. So I'm ready to change this because my sixth formers have gone. Just update it. That's refreshed. It's now changed to green. So if you want to stop loans past a particular date, this is the easiest way to do it for a single group. And some of you may have textbooks and you may have set a fixed due date. It has the same effect. The item would be due back on this date. Now that date has passed. So if I want to reset this for the new school year textbook issuing, you just click on the cell and change the date. But you'll notice that there is no calendar here, so you'll need to know what date to put in here. And then I'll just save that. And it refreshes again, but you see I didn't do the year, so it didn't actually work. So we'll just change that and save it. That's better. So that is now green. So I can now issue textbooks for the next year. And then you may also have in borrowers, you may put in expiry dates into borrowers themselves. So the levers that I have, again, I was getting a message to say that they had an expiry date. So there it is there. I think it's easier to use the lending rules for circulation expiry dates. But another way of identifying borrowers and the time to remove them is using a borrower expiry date. So I could, let's say, search for my new year 13s. There they are. One borrower that's a bit strange there, so I would need to investigate what happened there. But I'll go to my right-hand menu and I'll choose Set Expiry Dates. So I put in the date that I want there, so I can choose it from my calendar. So choose it, choose Change. Then it asks you, do you want to proceed? So we'll say yes to that. And then those borrowers have been updated. So I can just go back and have a look and see that the changes happened there. So this borrower here, there's something a bit strange going on with them, but their expiry date is correct. So you may have the occasional anomaly that you need to go back and check. It could be the student code or something that's gone, that's not quite right with that. Okay, so that would be something that I would need to investigate, but I'm not going to worry about that too much today. So if you have both circulation expiry dates and expiry dates in borrowers, the first date is the one that takes precedence. So just to my final slide here with the lending rules, check if you've got circulation expiry dates or if you've got fixed due dates, and also the new borrower loan categories as your students go up in years. So that's why I've had to update those previous borrowers.